well. Okay. The webinar is being recorded. So the title of our session is Working Well, Finding Space for Movement, Self-Care, and Community at the Brock Library. And we are joined by our three panelists, who I will introduce. We are joined by Justine Cotton, who is the Teaching and Learning Librarian for Humanities and Social Sciences at Brock University. Chelsea Humphreys, who is a Liaison and Collections Librarian at Brock University, and also Laurie Morrison, who is the Head of Liaison Services at Brock University. So I am going to be keeping my eye on the chat and also the time. And I'll turn off my camera now and turn it over to our three panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I am going to share my screen and I will ask my co-hosts to let me know if they can see it. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yes? Okay, great. I will start it off. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to talk about this topic because it means a lot to each of us in different ways. So it's great to be able to share some ideas and also hear some ideas from you as well. So a little about us. I will just do a very brief introduction and I'll let my co-host talk a little bit more when it gets to their part. So we've shared some pictures and our social media handles here. So we would really love to stay in touch after the session as well, so we can keep connected. I am a librarian and I also teach fitness classes and yoga classes in my spare time. And I have a real interest in wellness topics. My colleague Laurie, we've been colleagues for a long time now, and her angle on wellness is a little bit different than mine, but I am very excited to hear what she has to share today too. Chelsea is unfortunately no longer our colleague, but we had a wonderful time working with her when she was at Brock, and she really spearheaded a lot of wellness initiatives during her relatively short time. So I know she's going to bring all of those amazing initiatives over to her new job at Memorial University. So without further ado, we are going to kick off our session with a short meditation. So I will turn it over to Laurie.
Thanks, Justine. So I'll just say a little bit. If any of you are familiar with the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, Joseph Goldstein's Sharon Salzberg, or with John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction, this will sound very familiar. They are that's my influence, their influence on me. So it'll just be, less than 5 minutes. We'll just sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, however you feel most comfortable. And we'll just start by listening to the sounds around us. Perhaps you have a loud HVAC system in your office, or perhaps you're working from home and somebody's mowing the lawn. Some sounds are pleasant more than others, and we might chase after some and push others away, but just for these few moments, we'll try to just let them wash through us. So bring your attention to your hands and see if you can connect with the sensations, the warmth, pressure, pulsing. And you don't have to name those feelings, just be with them and feel them. Now bring your attention to the feeling of the breath, the actual sensations of the in and out breath. It's just the normal, natural in and out breath. You don't have to do anything different. You don't have to breathe any deeper. Just the normal in and out breath, where you can find a place perhaps where it's strongest for you, perhaps at the nostrils or the rising or falling of the chest or the abdomen. Just find that place and bring your attention there and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. Just one breath in and out. As images and thoughts, sensations arise that aren't very strong, just let them flow by. Right now, you're breathing. Stronger emotions or thoughts that have arisen that pull you away, just note what they are and let them go and come back to the breath. Times the thoughts take you away, you jump on the train of association. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you got there. It's the moment when you realize you've been gone. That's the moment of awareness where we can do things differently. We can bring some patience and some gentleness to returning back to the breath. And it doesn't matter how many times it happens. It can happen thousands of times, over and over. It's really that moment when you become aware that you've been gone that is that magic moment. When you can do things differently and with gentleness and compassion, calmness, just bring your attention back to the breath. Breath is always with you. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes and lift your gaze. Come back to the present moment together. Thank you for practicing. Always interesting to do that when you're the one presenting and trying to be calm. So we'll move into the presentation. So something that my colleagues, Chelsea and Justine started early on in the pandemic when things got flipped was a wellness channel on Teams. And it was a wonderful idea to just, we just put things in there that just remind us that there's other things going on besides a pandemic. And last fall, I just put an open call out to see if anybody would be interested in joining a weekly meditation. And I was happy, you can move to the next slide, Justine. I was happy that there was a group that responded. And so since the fall, we've been meeting weekly. Is it working, Justine? You can move to the next slide. Yeah. We've been meeting weekly over Teams with a short 5 to 10 minute guided meditation that one of us will find online. And when I started this, in fact, I wanted to really intentionally not be the one who was totally responsible for it, but have a shared responsibility. And I'm really happy that that my colleagues joined in on that. And so it's not my group, it's our group. We each look for guided meditation to share. We don't even assign it necessarily from one week to the next. We just show up. And if somebody's got something, that's great. that's meditation or something about mindfulness that we can participate together on with. If not, I've always got something queued up as I am a 10% happier app person with Sharon Salzberg, who's, you know, amazing. And so we just do that together. And it's a moment where we come together with no goals. There's no pressure. There's no performance. You don't have to do anything except to show up. And so I'll move on to student wellness. Student wellness, we'll start by saying, first I want to nod to Justine and Chelsea when they came up with the idea for this panel. They invited me to participate. I'm really grateful because I'm starting a sabbatical on July 1st. And this is a topic that I'm looking at student wellness in terms of our silent and quiet study spaces. And so the ideas that I'm presenting to you today, I'll be delving into more deeply. And before I get too far into this, I just want to say a quiet word about silence. It's just a funny quiet silence. I'm not really going to distinguish between those two words. That's bigger than this presentation. But when I am speaking about silence, I'm really thinking about it in the context of the absence of sound, of noise. And so I want to start with a nod over to this well-known action figure. And even though it's been received somewhat negatively over the years, I think that that's just the negative stereotype of the shushing librarian, right? Because for me, I like her because she stands for as a gatekeeper for the silence and quiet in libraries. And I propose that we really rethink what Nancy Pearl, who was modeled for this action figure, that we really think differently about what she represents. And she's really reminds us of our traditional role of the place of calm and quiet in libraries that offer a busy and bustling campus. We can really be seen as a refuge on our campuses for scholarly pursuits of our users. However, university administrators look at the library, and many of us have seen this firsthand. I certainly have. They look at these huge swaths of valuable space on our campuses. And so many of us have been clearing the stacks and making room for demand for collaborative spaces on our campuses. And Brock is no different in that respect. So in the next slide, you'll see an example of our latest renovation. This on the right side of the image, you can see the 3 group study rooms and a row of Starbucks-like workspaces that take up a large footprint of the floor. And there are signs to be quiet, but it's not designed with that in mind. You can see that, you know, you're sitting so closely to each other. It's really a very noisy space. Although right now, I took that last week, it looks pretty quiet. But on an average day in October, it's anything but quiet. And I would suggest that on our campuses and beyond, quiet has become a scarce resource. In his work, Manifesto for Silence, Stuart Sim explains that businesses use music to stimulate consumer behavior. We can go to the next slide. So take, for example, things like shopping malls where there's music playing all over the place. And I want to make sure that I'm not sounding like one of those people that's like, it should be quiet everywhere. Not at all, but we have an opportunity to look around and see that the music that's playing everywhere is there on purpose. It stimulates consumer behavior and buying, and businesses know that. And that's why they're doing it. And there are places where we don't need it, like medical waiting areas. I mean, you've been in them where the TV cable is playing and there's the ads playing on our consumer desires. Even when I'm getting my teeth cleaned, the radio's on. Sometimes it's fun and sometimes not so much. So quiet is a commodity. And in a very noisy world with a dearth of quiet places, we now see that businesses are offering up silence as a commodity for purchase. We go to the next slide. So I don't know if you've traveled, probably not so much in the last 2 years, but if you have, you know that if you upgrade your plane ticket, you can get out of that. What you see is the noisy airplane terminal there, and you can get into a nice quiet lounge for your upgraded class. And even the Airport terminals themselves are offering free quiet, for a fee, quiet lounges where you don't have to put up with overhead gate announcements or bickering families. I love this Mercedes here. It's a beautiful car. I don't love it. I don't want it, but they market it as the quietest car in the world. It's so quiet. Actually, some people have said it makes them nauseous, and that's a pretty big price at $200,000 for a car that makes you want to throw up. The watches there are marketed for their silence. There's no ticking, there's no winding, and they start around $30,000 and go up hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then there's the $400 noise canceling headphones from Bose. Anybody else have one set of those? Yeah, I've got those too. So what I'm trying to do is paint a picture here where we're in a noisy world where the quiet is a commodity for the very well-heeled, and yet our students are not. And we have an opportunity with this scarce and valuable commodity to do something with it, to offer, we're well positioned to offer today's bustling world a place for our students who are largely not among the well-heeled for a quiet place to study. In fact, if we go to the next slide, you'll see that Martin and Tonyan's study from 2021 found that students still want quiet study areas. I love this quote. "This is my favorite place to study and get work done." She's talking about the library, because I'd actually study and get work done. If I go home, I'm a little distracted and I want to get stuff done. So I just want to say again that we're well positioned for these quiet and study places within the dialogue of a scarce resource that is still in demand. And we can see that we have a case for quiet. There's loads of evidence abound that silence improves concentration, stimulates creativity, and stimulates brain growth, reduces stress hormones, and replenishes mental resources. I love this quote. "The cognitive functions most strongly affected by noise are reading attention, memory, and problem solving." And Justine, if you just hit click, you'll get another image show up. There it is. This is part of our silent study area in the Brock Library. Do you love it? We've invested in the above image there in the collaborative space. We've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in collaborative space, but this is what we're doing with our silent study. There's lots of reasons for that, but those who seek silent study deserve just as much a nice, beautiful, quiet area to study in. And yes, that's not a design in the carpeting, that's duct tape holding it together. That's a very quick trajectory through what I'm thinking in terms of a case for quiet. I'll leave it there and look forward to a discussion. Handing it over to Chelsea.
Awesome, thank you so much, Lori. So hi, everyone. Just really briefly, my name is Chelsea. I know Justine introduced me at the start of this session, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background information about me before I launch into what you can see here, library yoga. So I am an early career librarian. I spent the first 2 years of my career at Brock, which was absolutely wonderful, and I will be transitioning over to Memorial University very soon. But I've also been a yoga instructor for the past 6 years, and I've practiced yoga since I was 12 years old. Yoga has been a huge part of my life, and I firmly believe in taking some of those elements and bringing them into our workspaces, and that includes our library spaces. So if we move on to the next slide, I think the first question many people might have is, why would you even practice yoga in the library? Yoga and libraries are two very different worlds, but I think some of the experiences that we have in libraries, either working in libraries or studying and doing research in libraries, provides, I don't know, an opportunity to explore some yoga practices a little bit. So I've listed here just a few experiences that we may have had while we've been in a library. We might be doing research, getting frustrated, not finding exactly what we're looking for, and we're finding it hard to focus now because we're feeling overwhelmed with our research. I know as a student, I definitely had that feeling a lot. Or maybe you've been working for hours. If the library is your productive space, you're there for a really long time and you can hardly focus your eyes on the computer screen anymore. You're really feeling a little run down. Or perhaps you're attending a long class or a meeting if you work in a library, or you're attending a big long conference like that of today, and you're surprised to find by the end of the day that your shoulders and your neck are sore. Feelings of overwhelm, exhaustion, and feeling that physical tension in your neck, your shoulders, eye strain, all of that are sort of experiences that can be alleviated a little bit through a yoga practice. So I don't think these worlds are really quite as mutually exclusive as you might initially think them to be. And I think it's important to consider, alongside Lori's discussion of the spaces themselves, the programs that we offer in some of these spaces. And I think that could be done in our physical spaces and also through library yoga in some of our virtual spaces. So next slide, please. I really do think that yoga and other mindfulness practices can offer a necessary break from our work and studies, and those that offer a little bit of movement we don't tend to see in academic spaces. And I think that can be really, really useful. And it's something I believe in very firmly, and I know Justine does too. So the goal really of this program and some of the other programs that we're going to be discussing in just a few minutes is to encourage students and researchers to take care of themselves while they conduct their work. We're sharing the information and expertise that we have in the library, and we're trying to set the tone for a healthy approach to studies on campus. And especially this sharing of information and expertise, I think is really important, because that's what a library is. A library shares information, it disseminates information, and this is just a different way of doing that. And I think it's really beneficial, not only to the research that's being done in the library, but to the researchers who are doing that research. So we'll continue to the next slide. And this is just a little bit about library yoga itself. If you're interested in learning more about some of the details involved in planning library yoga, I will be presenting on this tomorrow during the conference. So tomorrow, I think it's at noon. I would love for you to join me and I can dive into more detail then. But just as a brief overview, this was a virtual yoga program. It started in 2020. So of course, nothing was really happening in person in those days. But it was designed to be done in any kind of space. If people were practicing in maybe a dorm room, if they were in their office, wherever they might be, and in any kind of clothing, not presupposing any experience with yoga, no need for stretchy, fancy yoga pants, not even really a need for a mat. You can see from the screenshot here, I was often teaching from my office. I was wearing my work clothes, often seated in a chair, and I tried to offer many varieties of postures for people to practice. So it was as accessible as I could make it. And I'm constantly learning and trying to update my ability to render the classes as accessible as possible. So all of these were very classes of very simple postures and sequences. I am a certified instructor, and I thought that was very important as well. So I'm not teaching anything that could be actively harmful to people. I think that's really important. And the classes were very intentionally designed to alleviate some of that mental and emotional stress we might be feeling, those feelings of overwhelm, of anxiety, and also some of the physical strain of long hours seated at a desk, doing our studies, looking at screens, especially during the pandemic where we're living on our screens. And these programs as well were recorded and shared publicly on the library's YouTube channel. So in the next slide, you'll see the full playlist. It's available. You can explore it if you like. You can even see kind of how the classes have progressed. I know they've developed a lot over the last 2 years, and towards the end of the playlist, I think they might be more accessible. It's something I've been constantly working on. And this has gone pretty well. There was a pretty constant attendance going on. Students, staff, faculty, librarians, it's been open to everybody to attend. And I think it does offer a moment to kind of reflect on how you're moving through your workday, through your research, and what your affective and physical experience is during that, because it matters. It matters how you approach your work and how you are doing as you do that work. With that in mind, we'll move to the next slide to talk about another program that we offered, and this is called Mindful Research. And this really focused on pulling a mindful perspective into the library research process. So in the next slide, we'll see a brief sort of description of what this was. This was a co-curricular workshop. Students could attend for co-curricular credit. And we just discussed mindfulness and mindfulness practices, what they are, what they could be, and ways in which mindfulness can be brought into the library research process. And you can see this slide that's encapsulated here. Take a moment to reflect. This was a part of our workshop. Justine and I ran this together. And it's asking students to turn inwards a little bit, noticing the quality of their work when they're tired, hungry, stressed, upset, worried. Maybe if you're physically sore, if you've been sitting for a while, all of these things can impact the way we approach our work. And I think it's really important to take those into consideration and bring that sort of rounded perspective to who you are as a researcher, who our students are in the library, who we are working in the library. Take that rounded perspective of who we are as full people and try to support the full people who are around us. So in the next slide, we talk a little bit about approaching work mindfully and taking mindful breaks. Approaching work mindfully could be reflecting upon and remaining aware of your physical, mental, and emotional state while working. It could be being rooted in the present moment, so maybe turning off that cell phone or putting it aside, no distractions. And approaching your work non-judgmentally and remaining open to discovery. And this can be really challenging. I know many students want to come in and write the perfect paper. They think it has to go a particular way. They need this exact resource, but it doesn't always go that way. And you have to be kind of open to the winding path that your research might take you upon. All of those things I think can be beneficial when discussing research. And it's not something that we often discuss when we have research consultations or we go into classes to teach very particular topics. We're not often talking about the mindset with which we approach this. And I think that can be really important. We also talk about mindful breaks, and really mindful breaks can be anything that's done intentionally and mindfully can be a mindful break. I know my own biases are towards yoga, towards meditation, a walk outside, but really anything that you need in that moment, you can approach it mindfully. And that's sort of what we're going for when we run the workshop. And I think there's one more slide on this here before I turn things over to Justine. And this is just a reflection on those workshops. Our attendance was small, but it was mighty. The workshops were a really cool and unique opportunity to connect with a small group of students on a more personal level. As I mentioned, we were discussing things that you don't really get to talk about in traditional research-focused workshops and consultations. And I think Justine would probably agree with me. We had really interesting discussions with students, and there was a really great back and forth. We were all sharing our experiences and our own expertise, and we got to learn from each other in those sessions. And it was a really unique, holistic form of connection that I think just benefits our relationships as librarians with our students and our researcher population that we work with regularly. We also shared wellness resources that are available through the library and elsewhere on campus to support the whole student. And again, this just gets back to my point, as librarians, as libraries, we are there to disseminate this information. This is just another mode of doing that. And I think it's just as important. But this isn't all of the programming we did. I'll pass things over to Justine to talk a little bit more about some other programs.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. So just as Chelsea said, I think there's a real appetite in our student body and in our staff members to really dive more deeply into wellness. So a few other things that we were involved with was a workshop. This was a standalone workshop that we offered online, and we tried to title it in a way that would be appealing to students. So we know students are probably mostly on Instagram now. I don't find that they tend to use a lot of Facebook. So a lot of them are finding information on Instagram, maybe not intentionally, but absorbing a lot of information on Instagram. So we thought we would create this workshop and use it in a way to teach them critical thinking skills. So it was a new approach that we had not done before, and we have our slides and our references all available if you would like to use them. But it was a very fun workshop. We ran it on Valentine's Day. Again, we had a small group, but it was a very active and involved group. So we had some great conversations. It was really interesting to learn how aware they were of the types of bad information that is online. We tried to teach some things about how to verify the health claims that are made online, how you can find more reputable health information online, because it really just is a glut of information. So in my other job as a fitness instructor, I tend to follow a lot of fitness accounts, and I'm able to tell sometimes, you know, this is never going to happen. You're never going to be able to get abs in 3 weeks. It's just probably not physically safe or possible. But I'm not sure that students or people with less experience in that realm would always know that. So it was a very interesting session, really fun to do. And I think it's a great way to approach the topic of information literacy in a different manner than a typical, you know, library research session. So I think it was very fun. I would definitely recommend, if somebody wanted to use our concept, we were more than happy to share that with you. So I would like to share a little bit more about a project that's very dear to my heart. And similar to Lori, I'll be taking a sabbatical in August for a year. And this research that I did in the fall and winter will form a big part of what I'll be looking into. So during the fall and winter, I ran a wellness book club for students. So I used a fiction book in the fall, Tuck Everlasting. I mainly chose it because I had read it before. It's a short read, it's a young adult novel, but it really tackles a lot of themes that came out during the pandemic. And if anyone wants to find out more about why I chose that book and why it formed the basis for a lot of really good discussions with students, I'm happy to share that with you. The second term, I did the book Spark, which is a nonfiction book about the power of exercise for brain health, memory, mood, and all of the great things that physical exercise does for us physically and emotionally. So we know that recreational reading, there's a lot of great research out there about how it can affect our stress levels. So I really wanted to see if starting this book club virtually, we had to run it virtually. I would love to have done it in person, but due to the restrictions, we had to do it online, whether this would have an effect on student stress levels. So what I did was I invited them to join the book club. We had a small group in the fall. I had 4 students in the fall, and I think 22 students in the winter term. And we met a few times virtually. They picked up the books in person. And what I asked them to do, if they were willing to do it, was participate in a pre-survey and a post-survey with a perceived stress level test to see if the book club had an effect on their stress levels. So I was really excited to run this. The students were amazing. They were so enthusiastic about the topic. So this is just a little bit more about the logistics of how I ran it. I'm not quite sure why the winter term was much more successful than the autumn term. It might have been timing, how busy the fall is versus the winter. But it was great because 2 to 3 of the students from the fall decided to do it in the winter as well. So I was really happy to see that they had had a good experience. So I thought I would share some feedback. I haven't had the chance yet to dive really deeply into the survey results, but I found some really great comments to pull out. The conversations that we had in our meetings really have nothing to do with the research. It was more just an experience that they could build community, get to know some like-minded students. And I would say the common theme that came out of it was that they're super lonely. I think the pandemic had really strong effects on our student body, like more than I even knew about. It was actually kind of heartbreaking to hear some of their stories. There was one student, an international student, he came up to my office to pick up the book. They all wanted to meet me in person, which I thought was kind of funny. None of them wanted to pick up the book like from the help desk. They wanted to come and meet me. And again, I think that just comes from all of us being so separate for so long. But this one student, he said this was his first time on campus. He had arrived in September and he had not yet been to campus. And this was late January. So stories like that just broke my heart. And it made me think these wellness initiatives that we're talking about are so important. I think sometimes people brush off wellness initiatives as just being very sort of like accessory programming, but I think they are so important. And as Chelsea said, and Lori said, I think we have such an important role to play in the library. So this was just a little bit more, one more comment from the students. It was very heartening as a fitness instructor to hear how many people decided to build more exercise into their life after reading the Spark book, which is a fantastic book, by the way. Definitely encourage you to read that. Okay, so just a few future plans. I'm trying to do an in-person book club in the fall. I would like to add a survey incentive because not everybody who participated did end up filling out that post survey. And I would love to incorporate more movement. So continue what great plans Chelsea has had in yoga with the library, and also do more community building. Okay, so we have our references. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now because we will be sharing our PowerPoint. And we would really like at this point to just open up the floor for conversation. And I think we can dive into the conversation right away, or we can do a roundtable. Maybe what we'll do is we'll see if there's any questions. And if not, we can share a little bit about what mindfulness and wellness has brought to our own lives. So let me pause here and I'll just open the floor. I know we have the chat going and I haven't had a chance to take a look at that yet either. So are there any questions for us about the programming that we've done, or anybody want to share some things that they've observed maybe in their own libraries? And you can use the chat or you can raise your hand. I think you can probably unmute, although I'm not totally sure about that in this presentation. Okay. So while we get the questions rolling, I think maybe we'll just take a quick round table and we'll maybe talk very briefly about what wellness and mindfulness has meant to us. And I've been doing a lot of talking, so I'm going to turn it over to one of my co-hosts before it comes back to me. So maybe I'll pass it over to Lori first.
Sure. I'm actually looking at a comment in the chat. I'm just going to read it because it's and we can do that. We just Christina. So the design of the first open study area that I show, the new one was, even if it was silent, it's full of visual distractions. I'd find it hard to study. Sitting across from someone you'd constantly be making eye contact with. Yeah. Then the bar style seating was so much open space. Your back is uncomfortable. People passing by you. Well, yeah, those are really good comments. And it's an area that I want to look more further into, is what architectural features signal behavior to people. I know that exists, but I haven't got a clue what that's all about. So that's an interesting comment that you're pointing towards there. Are there other comments too? Oh, okay. So you can't raise your hands or unmute because of the format. So please add your questions or comments to the chat.
There is a question in the Q&A and I hit the answer live button. So I don't know if you guys can see it anymore. Unfortunately, I shouldn't have done that. Sorry. But Maggie Gordon is asking, any tips for librarians who would like to start a book club for students? How did you go about getting buy-in from administrators and colleagues?
Yes, I'm happy to answer that one. So I approached it as a research project. So I just let my our university librarian know that I would be doing this. And then I did use some library channels in order to recruit for the book club. It was a very low-key type of project. So I ended up purchasing the books from my professional development fund. I ordered them from a really discount bookseller. And it ended up being less than $100, I think, for the books. So I didn't really worry too much about getting buy-in because it was a research project. I think if it was more of a library-led initiative, there may be more hoops to jump through. But I think at the end of the day, it is such a low time and money investment type of initiative that I think it just worked so well. It had such positive effects, and it didn't really cost very much money. Or I'd say the biggest investment was time. So I did run meetings at night sometimes, so the students would be able to come after school. So many of them are working jobs. I did ask that in the survey, how many people had jobs outside of their classes. So I hope that answers your question. I think if you can argue for, I did a lot of research on the benefits of book clubs and the benefits of recreational reading. We do have a popular reading collection that we've had for a number of years. So I think there's general support among our administration for recreational reading in general. So I hope that answers your question. Happy to follow up too. Okay, so maybe I think there's a question in the chat here that maybe Lori would be able to address about quiet.
Sure. Yeah, Susan, but quiet is a commodity. the need to truly quiet space in the library. I think a lot about acoustics in library spaces. Is there a difference in materials or furnishings in those spaces? I don't know exactly. Well, I do know a little bit about when we put in a learning commons down on the first floor of the Brock Library. We intentionally installed fabric on the walls to assist with keeping the noise muted. But that's that open collaborative space. But certainly it works the same as in quiet spaces. There's material and furnishings. You know, that picture that I sent you of the newer space, it's not soft. There's no soft surfaces. It's all very hard and echoey. And yeah, librarians don't always have control over physical architecture. Absolutely. And I don't know, you know, I worked with the architects and administration on that fifth floor image, like the Starbucks kind of, and what really sold it to administration was there would be more seats for students, because there's that ratio, right, of how many students you have and how much space you have for student study. So that was, they loved it, because they're jam packed, and like the comment earlier from Christina, it is like a Starbucks. I'm not sure that that's something we want to be modeling our spaces after, but that's a different question for a different day.
Okay, I don't see any active questions right now. Oh, there comes. Yeah, it's hard to make everybody happy.
Yeah, it is. It's been interesting as I've been reviewing, because the surveys are just duplicated over and over again. What do students want in the library? And it's not gone, their desire for quiet space has not gone away. And don't get me going on the of hoo-hoo that is brainstorming. There's no evidence that supports it, and you can look at Susan Cain's work for that in the book she aptly named Quiet. There's nothing. What? And plugs. Yes, thanks, Jennifer. Were there recommendations on lighting services? Excellent.
So Lori, do you want to talk a little bit about how you found mindfulness and what it's meant for your career? And
sure. I think it's been a curiosity for me for all of my adult life. And I finished my master's, and a friend of mine gave me a gift of a silent meditation retreat. And most people don't start out going to a 10-day silent meditation retreat. I had sort of dabbled in meditation, but I certainly didn't have a focused practice that would support 10 days. But that's sort of how I fell into it. And like Justine, could see that there was an overlap with my work as well. And so there's in fact a group that I work with that puts on a silent meditation retreat annually, although I see, above pandemic has changed that, but we do meet weekly now. So I am involved in that as well. And I've done some mindfulness-based stress reduction. I think some people might be aware of MBSR, John Kabat-Zinn's work, and I've started some training, teacher training in that. So that's how I come into it. I should also mention that in the introduction, it said that I was head of liaison. I'm no longer. I'm a collections librarian and happily over in collections. But anyways, that's just an aside. I think there are probably other people in the session that have also done some work with mindfulness, different mindfulness practices, and I'd be interested to hear from them as well. I think a lot of people have different ways to finding ways to unplug and find some peacefulness around them. And it can be through exercises. You're talking, Justine, the health benefits. Some people find running, I don't understand that, but anyway, some people find running to be very, very calming. Yeah.
Yes, I think Chelsea is a runner too, in addition to doing yoga. Do you want to talk briefly, Chelsea?
Yeah, I would definitely put in a word for running. I think that can be absolutely a wonderful, mindful experience if you allow it to be. I think it can be a very stressful one too. So really hit and miss, depends on the person. But in terms of mindfulness practices, I mean, I shared earlier in the presentation that I kind of found yoga when I was 12. It was in the Parks and Rec guide in Toronto. I signed up. It was in like the lunchroom of a school, and I fell in love with it really early on. And it has helped me in so many ways. I was the first in my family to go to university. It was a very stressful experience. Nobody else had been through it before. And I was very grateful for yoga clubs on campus. They helped to kind of keep me level while I was going through things. And I will say a shout out to the University of Toronto, the Inforum Library for the iSchool, the library school. Kathleen Schaefer developed the iRelax program, putting a bunch of yoga props in the library. Nothing else, just putting the yoga props there, some guided meditations, some yoga books, related things. But when I saw that in the library, I was like, wow, okay, this space cares about me as a person, not just as a student. And that just shifted my thinking. And as a yoga instructor at that point, as someone who practices yoga and also being a grad student at the same time, that just kind of brought everything together for me. And that made a huge difference. And that's something I've wanted to carry forward as a librarian now, bringing that mindful layer, whatever that means to you, to your experience as a librarian, as a researcher, as a student. I think that's really important. And I don't think those two can be dissociated. And I don't think they should be dissociated. And I know there was a comment in the chat about it being very easy to forget about the mind-body connection. And 100%, yeah, if your body feels bad, your brain isn't thinking well either. That's totally true. And that for me is where the physical practice of yoga can be really, really beneficial. Yoga is much more than the physical practice. I know in Western society, it's become very much like a fitness activity, but it does extend well beyond that. And I think the physical practice, at least, is intended to quiet the mind for meditation. That's sort of the goal of the asana practice. And I really see a deep connection between taking some of that element, that physical movement, to quiet the mind for research, for study, for academic work, for any kind of service work. I think they naturally go hand in hand. And so I feel really grateful to have been at the Brock Library, where I can pursue some of these ideas and some of this programming. It's, for me, it's even made the space, I don't know, feel more like a community for me, like with my coworkers, with students, in so many ways. I've been in workplaces before where I've even been nervous to get up from my desk if I really need to stretch, if my back hurts or something. And I don't feel that way in the library here at all. I feel like I can take that moment to gather my thoughts, stretch a little bit, make sure I'm back where I need to be. And I can just see there's a question in the chat here. Does that technique, leaving materials openly accessible, work in the library workplace? How do you allot work time to mindfulness for well-being? Okay, thank you so much for this question. So the iRelax system at U of T, all those yoga props that were sort of left in the library, they were openly accessible. How did that work in the library workplace? So I know there were a bunch of professors who would borrow some of those materials and bring them into their classrooms so that students could sit on a meditation cushion instead of sitting at a desk. A bunch of students would take some of those materials and props and they would sit off in a corner. They might do a couple stretches and then return to their studies. It was sort of a take it when you need it and leave it when you don't kind of thing. It was a really interesting setup in the library and I really liked it. I would love to pursue a lending program for props in the future where people can kind of take things from the library, use them as needed. And then how do you allot work time to mindfulness for well-being? That's, I think, a trickier question to answer. And I will say the meditation group that we have at Brock has been a wonderful thing. It's half an hour, I think it was half an hour on Tuesdays. I haven't been joining lately because I think, as we've shared, I'm in the process of moving on to another university right now. But it was just half an hour a week, gathering with colleagues, talking about sort of what's going on with us lately, doing a guided meditation together, and then moving on with our day from that space. It was not super formal. And I think just having that as a like in the calendar routine and library yoga being a few times every term during a lunch hour. It was almost spare time, but not spare time. Just having those things scheduled, I think, shifts the mindset that you have, where if you need to take 5 minutes to get up from your desk, stretch, or 10 minutes, go for a short walk, it feels more accessible to you. I don't know if that's totally an answer, and I don't know if others may have thoughts about this as well. But that's sort of my take on it. So maybe Justine, I'll pass it back to you.
Sure, thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, I think I try to build in a little bit into my day. And similarly, like when you think about doing an instruction session for students, there's ways to throw in a little bit of wellness without taking too much time away from the session. So I think I've always shared, like, it's been a little bit intimidating to share this, but sometimes I've done some stretch breaks. I was doing a virtual session for some PhD students and they were very open to it. I mean, you always kind of put yourself out there a little bit when you try to get them to do something maybe that they're not expecting, but I feel like it adds a little bit extra to the session, something that they can take away with them, and maybe if they enjoyed that, incorporate it into their own life. I haven't seen any other questions come up in the chat. I was just going to share very briefly. Okay, 3 minutes left. Okay, so I'll just share something really, really briefly. And that is just a little bit about where I landed with fitness. So I actually did I had been doing group fitness since high school, loved it. I was never a sporty kid. So group fitness was really a way. I had done dance for a long time. It was a way of getting that sort of team group experience in a non-sports environment. And so I actually got certified as a fitness instructor when I started my first library job at Brock, and Brock was my first library job. And part of the reason I did it was because I was very shy naturally, and I wanted to be able to speak in front of a group comfortably and be able to speak well and create a lot of engagement. And I think teaching fitness classes really helped me in that respect. And that is still an area that I really love to dive into, is how do we create those great classroom experiences, and how do we build community, even if it's just a one-off session. So if I go to teach a fitness class, sometimes I'm seeing regular people, sometimes I'm seeing new people. So how do you make sure you make connections with everybody in a short time period, making everybody feel welcome? So I'm always interested in researching from both perspectives, from the fitness perspective and then also from library teaching. How do we bring elements from both into a really great and engaging experience? So I'm always curious to talk with people about whether they have ideas on that topic. I think all three of us are so excited to keep the conversation going after today. So that's why we provided our contact information on social media, and we will be sharing our slides too through the presentation. So please reach out if you do have thoughts or questions. We would love to hear from you. So I think if there are no further questions, I don't know if Michelle needs to say anything to wrap up, but just a huge thank you from all three of us for your attention and your comments and joining our session today. We were so excited to do this.
Yeah, I'll just say a final word, just thanking our three panelists for joining us today. It was a really wonderful presentation, and thanks to all the participants today. So the slides will be available later and the recording as well. So thanks everybody for joining us.